Lovely. Well, welcome everyone for joining us today. I'm Jessica, a HR Director at JourneyHR, and I've got the privilege of guiding today's discussion. We've a brilliant panel lined up, and I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves in the moment. But before we do that, I've got a quick bit of housekeeping to take you through. Firstly, we're recording today's session, so if anyone wants to turn their camera off, then that's absolutely fine. Secondly, please can our audience mute their microphones just to reduce that background noise. You'll have the opportunity for questions at the end, and you're more than welcome at that time to put questions either in the chat function, or you can shout them out if you wish to do so. So why are we all here today? The workplace is evolving rapidly, as we know. We're seeing changing workforce expectations, demographic shifts, and the growing need to keep pace with an emerging technology and all those legislative changes. Can someone just mute their background noise, please?
Keeping busy.
Hi there, can someone just mute their background, please? Thank you so much.
Nice to glass, Kirsty.
Thank you. So as businesses navigate the challenges, there's a lot to consider today, and we're going to explore the key trends shaping the future of work and how organisations can stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, they do look nice.
If everyone can please just mute their microphones so we don't hear the background noise, that would be super. Thank you. So before we get into the details, I'd love for each of our panellists to introduce themselves. So Tanya, if we can start with you, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Tanya Goodman, and I'm an employment lawyer. I head up the team at Collyer Bristow. We are a city-based law firm covering all things employment and lots of other stuff. And I'm here today to talk about some developments, emerging developments in employment law.
Lovely. Thanks, Tanya. As I said earlier, I'm Jessica Anderson-Ramschel. I'm a HR Director at JourneyHR. I have just over 20 years experience working across creative media advertising agencies, and I've been with Journey about 3 years now. Charlie.
Morning, everybody. Yes, my name's Charlie Pitts. I'm attending here from Connor Broadley. So we are a employee benefits and wealth management firm supporting companies, agencies design and implement employee benefit programs for their staff. So we've been working in the creative industry now for around 20 years.
Lovely. Great to have you here, Charlie. And Graeme.
Yes, hello, everyone. I'm Graeme. I joined the IPA about 7 years ago as head of research. Those of you not familiar with the IPA, we're a trade body that represents agencies behind so much of UK advertising and comms. And we represent most of advertising agencies. About 90% of advertising spend goes through an IPA member agency, and offer the normal services you expect from a trade body: legal advice, insight, commercial guidance, that kind of stuff. But particularly relevant, I think, for today is we also produce a number of benchmark and profiling reports that help the industry understand the state of agencies on things like salary and charge out rates, costs, but importantly for today, demographic profiles. So we had released our census today that I'll be going through with you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to the panelists for joining today's session. So, Graeme, to help us set the scene a bit, given you've got access to some amazing insights and data points through your work at the IPA, looking at those industry trends, what key themes are emerging in terms of workforce demographics and the changing nature of the workforce?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, before I get started, I think it's really important that just acknowledge that it is really tough across our membership at the moment. You'll have heard there's been lots of recent mergers, and that's meant inevitable redundancies. So we're seeing some of those results coming through in our most recent census, but I feel that there's probably more changes to come, and there's certainly a sense, I think, of uncertainty out there. But most of what I'm going to talk about today is coming from our latest census report. So that's an industry MOT that we've been conducting since the 1960s, and it provides an incredibly rich picture of the general health of advertising agencies based on their employee structure. And it is literally hot off the press. It was released today. So while there's a huge amount of data that's included in that report, I'm really just going to focus today and highlight 4 key areas that have caught my eye in the report. So those areas are the decline in younger talent entering the industry, senior leadership's representation, and then how flexible working is now and what we're now considering the new normal. And of course, I'm going to touch a little bit on the perceived impact that AI is having on staffing levels across Adland. I couldn't not talk about AI, could we? So Firstly, I think the biggest finding that is coming out of this year's census is the drop in younger people that are working in the business now, and a reduction in those entering the business. And that's particularly noticeable across creative agencies, where some might say that AI is having the biggest impact. So across the board, 70% of creative agency members have reduced their headcount in the last year, and that's much higher than the 44% of media agencies that reduced their headcount. And as in creative agencies, there's also evidence that a reasonable proportion of that reduction in headcount has come from the younger talent. So we've seen a 27% reduction in the total number of under 25s that are working in creative agencies since 2024, sorry. And I think it would be naive, as I said, to think that AI isn't a factor that's driving that change. And I'll touch on that a little bit later with some stats. But what's compounding, I think, this age trend is the year-on-year reduction that we're seeing in entry-level roles and training. The number of entry-level roles and open vacancies fell by 41% in this latest report. And these are the junior execs. They're the trainees, they're the apprenticeships, and these roles that are clearly vital to the longer-term health of our industry. But as I say, I'll touch on this a little bit later, and there's some anecdotal evidence that this dip might be temporary. And on the issue of training, I have to mention that always disappointing apprenticeship levy figures. We see this every year, and it's getting worse. I think overall we've seen the proportion of agencies employing graduate and school leaver apprentices fall from 56% last year to 43% in this report. Yet our members continue to pay vast sums of money into what I feel is a broken system. So IPA members agencies paid more than £7 million into the apprenticeship levy last year, but they actually only used about 15% of that. So I believe, hopefully, the government is looking to redesign the scheme, but it really can't come soon enough, I think, in my view. So, okay, after that slightly gloomy start, I'm pleased to say that my second observation of our latest report is a little bit more positive, and it relates to gender and ethnicity representation. So just caveat this by saying that there is always more that we can do to promote better representation. But our data does show that we are continuing to move in the right direction, at least. So for the first time this year, we reported that more than 40% of executive and C-suite roles were held by women. And that's long been an IPA target for members. So has been for a number of years. And it's important, I think, that we finally have reached that. So that's some really good news. But it's also positive to see that women make up the majority of most junior positions, and 70% of under 25s that are joining the industry are women. And another first is the fact that just over 25% of employees across advertising agencies now come from a non-white background, and that's 4 times higher than it was in 2007. So when we first started recording the census. And again, we're showing that the future looks really positive, as representation is even higher at entry levels, with 45% of trainees and apprentices and 37% of juniors were recorded as coming from a non-white background. That's really positive. My third point, something that we've been tracking since the pandemic, and that's the home versus office debate. So firstly, it's fair to say that I think we've all been slowly returning to the office. I think we felt that. And as an industry, we have now settled, I think, pretty much on the 3-2 model. So 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. And over 70% of our agencies now adopting this approach. We've got 10% that offer 2 days and 9% that mandate 4 days. But there are only 2% of agencies now that ask their teams to be in the office 5 days a week. And when that flexibility is available, 12% of agencies allow their employees total freedom to choose the days that they come into the office, with the rest of agencies are mandating at least some of the days that they need to be in. And those of us that work in a more flexible office, I think, appreciate the freedom and balance that it gives. Certainly, I feel much more content in my work, knowing that I've got the flexibility to work where it best suits the task. But I think, as was always with this, with hybrid working, we've got to always remember that not all employees welcome that level of flexibility. Many don't have a home that's conducive to work, or even a personality that allows them to focus when they're not in the office, or even vice versa, to allow them to focus when they're in the office. So I always say that when presenting these stats, that I think the best arrangements are those that happen as a team level. not at a company level. So individual team leaders, in my view, I think are generally best placed to know what their people need, and we need to really listen to them. Okay, so just on my final point from this census, and as I said, there's an enormous amount of data in the census, so please go and seek it out. It was published this morning, and it's available to all IPA members. So the last point really is about AI, and as I say, I can't avoid this. It's a big topic at the moment. It was the first year that we asked specifically about the impact that AI was having on agencies and their workforce. And before I share these numbers, I just want to remind you that the IPA Agency Census is completed by HR leads, not individuals within an agency. So it's a survey of the total agency as given by HR individuals. So this year we asked our HR contacts to answer 3 agree/disagree statements, and those are: first one is AI is having a big impact on how we work. Second one is, in the past 12 months we've reduced our overall headcount, and the third one is, in the next 12 months we expect to reduce our headcount. So unsurprisingly, the vast majority of agencies felt that AI was having a really big impact on how they work. So 88% of agencies believe that. And then in terms of the current impact, it was less severe, but it's probably no less worrying. But 8% of agencies said that they had already reduced their headcount in the past 12 months due to AI or automation. And then almost a quarter of agencies felt that they will be reducing their headcount as a direct result of AI or automation. And that rose actually to 30% amongst creative agencies. Now, what's interesting, I think, here, though, is that I don't think these statistics necessarily tell the whole story. We've been looking at how to improve them, and we will look at how to change the wording in the future. But I've heard anecdotally that the impact of AI on jobs is not always necessarily as clear as it might seem. So a headcount reduction or a flat line in headcount might also be the result of investment challenges. So some agencies have told me that they need to invest so heavily and so quickly in new AI software and training that they've had little budget for recruitment. So this might be more of an indirect link for some agencies than a direct causal one. And those agencies that I spoke to, most of them hoped that investment would return to recruitment this year. So this might be just sort of temporary blip while they try and adjust to the new AI world. So as with everything with AI, it's a very movable, dynamic beast. So the impact of that, I think, continues to be difficult to predict. So those are my findings from the latest census. As I say, go and seek it out, please. It's a fantastic report. But back to you, Jess.
Thanks, Graeme. There's some really interesting insights there. I think, Charlie, coming to you, I'm really interested in your thoughts here, given the key trends Graeme's just highlighted. How does this translate into that benefits and rewards space? Specifically, how do you see employee benefits shifting from those nice to have perks to those core drivers of attraction, retention and productivity? And also, in addition to that, we're seeing a bit of a push towards those highly personalised benefits packages. But how do you feel organisations balance that individual choice with fairness, cost control, inclusion?
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of synergy with some of the points that Graeme made around, tech, AI, flexibility. And I think it's always worth, when we assess benefits, taking a step back and reviewing the landscape compared to a few years ago, when employees maybe just expected a salary bonus and a bit of healthcare or pension. The lines now between personal lives and working lives have definitely been blurred. So the expectation from employees to deliver good quality benefits that personalise them are really high in terms of expectation. And we've seen from feedback we get from our clients and the conversations that we have with HR leads, there is genuine interest from candidates when they're going through the interview process to learn about benefits, because, speaking openly, it provides insight for that interviewee as to how that agency treats their people and the culture at the business as well. So it's a great opportunity for agencies to actually stand out, because, if they're delivering good personalised benefits, ultimately that's going to work really well as an attraction and retention tool in terms of the agency's reputation in the sector. But obviously these benefits are going to support their employees as and when they need them throughout their career. So it's not obviously going to be day to day, but then going through that event as an individual, employees will understand that, or get a better feeling that the agencies are actually supporting them with their lives, and obviously that creates more loyalty and longer retention rates as well. So one thing that we've actually linked to the point Graeme made about tech and AI, if we move on to the next slide, one thing that we always talk about across benefits and in the industry is accessibility. It can be a bit of a minefield, especially for smaller SME businesses, to communicate their benefits to staff. And this obviously has a knock-on effect on perception and the feedback that actually an agency would get around the program that they're delivering. And the stat on the right-hand side is really telling. Around, over half of employees don't actually use their benefits because of barriers set in place. And that's normally due to a centralized platform or system not being in place to provide that kind of one-stop shop to go take a look at your benefits. So we've been seeing a real uptick in conversations and traction around tech and integrating that into benefits. And it's been acknowledged in the industry that employee benefits has been a bit far behind compared to other sectors, but we are definitely now getting there in terms of good solutions. And that leads more onto the stat on the left-hand side about more, on the same page, around more flexible benefit platforms being implemented across agencies and employers. Now that really allows an agency to unlock kind of next level benefits. So first of all, that place is going to be your one place to go around going to find out all your benefits you have as an agency. You can interact with them and even single sign on to insurer sites or whatever it is. But then an agency can actually unlock kind of like next level benefits in terms of offering flexible voluntary benefits, offering flex spends, for instance, that employees can engage with. And ultimately that drives a more of a cafeteria style benefit selection where people can interact at their discretion, moving away from the traditional blanket style that we do generally see. Now, I appreciate that platforms is probably not the most suitable for all companies because it may be, budget limitations, for instance, or just simply maybe not the correct solution out there for your business requirements. So I'm not saying tear up the rule book around the benefits that you're doing, and if you fall into the latter category, I'd most definitely take a look at kind of life stage benefits. So really taking a look at all the perks that you have in place through a life stage lens and how this can apply to the generations across your workforce as well. And that can really help you underpin your communication strategy to staff. If we just jump onto the next page, in terms of actual benefits that we see at the top of the list, it's probably no surprise to people joining the session today that healthcare support ranks really, really highly. Now, there are obviously a few reasons that people will know of on the call, the lack of confidence in the NHS, for example, with day-to-day access to healthcare services or long waiting times for surgeries and inpatient treatment. And actually, the private sector has been supplementing the NHS over the past few years as well to help battle that. But the one key change that we've actually seen across insurers is that they've moved more towards being preventative, holistic health insurers and providers, and not just that kind of catastrophe cover. So you're more than likely able to receive health MOTs, family cover, gym discounts on private medical insurance policies as well, which can obviously help with that preventative healthcare measures as well. Obviously, virtual GPs and prescriptions being part of those as well. So you can see kind of that on the right-hand side. The two telling stats, obviously, on this page is that 60% of employees would choose employer-funded medical insurance as their first top benefit, which take pensions, for example, being a really, really important benefit. Flexible working perhaps as well. So that's really telling. But on the flip side of that, less than half, 40% of employees are actually offering private healthcare in the UK. Now, there is a cost issue for agencies as well, because private medical insurance is turning into quite a costly benefit. And there might be a few alternatives out there like cash plans, lighter PMI through Benetton Health, for example, that you could look to turn to. But there's been a real demand in the recent couple of years. I'm sure a lot of us know of, a lot of publicity around weight management drugs and jabs, for instance, maybe not for the best reasons, and also neurodiversity support as well. So, in the creative industry, there are more diagnoses for neurodiverse conditions compared to other sectors. So there's been a real demand from agencies for that support to be embedded into medical insurance, and we're certainly seeing that now. So testing and coaching can be found in private medical insurance schemes, which is great. And on the weight management side as well, as an employee, you probably want your individuals to be accessing this correctly and safely. So insurers now have measures in place, whether that's coaching or whether that is jabs themselves, to access these types of treatment. So these are all, reasons why it's becoming more and more popular. Something on the next page, which is actually quite close to our hearts as a wealth management firm, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is the need and desire for financial support that employees are demanding. So again, nearly 60% really want financial well-being support from their employer over the next 3 years or so. And that's obviously not looking at pay, bonuses. It's really effectively supporting somebody's management of their salary through their career, and that really depends on the individual and what stage of their career that they are at. So, for instance, you may have a new grad employee who wants to not sure about how their student debt works, for example, or doesn't really understand their pay slip. Or you've got an employee who, senior employees with complex tax scenarios, or want to avoid, the 60% tax trap. So this kind of links back to the life stage point I made earlier. So there are a few solutions that employers can take to try and provide that financial well-being support. Individuals in the UK are at a massive disadvantage because obviously financial education has been missing from the educational system in the UK, and financial well-being is proven to be linked to somebody's mental well-being as well, with the stress and anxiety that debt or money management can actually cause. So a few solutions that employers can provide to their employees is financial planning clinics. So that's one-to-one appointments with a financial planner, which is actually a highly sought after benefit. We definitely see that. Education on a kind of like a wider scale, so group seminars, and that could be around money management, financial well-being tips and planning tips, or getting on the property ladder as well. But then I would also take a look at what your providers are doing. So does your pension provider provide a budgeting app, for example, and can that be downloaded and linked to banking apps to help individuals manage their money as well, because those are certainly out there. So promoting these types of benefits to staff can actually go a long way as well. The final point on here is obviously around the enhanced pension contributions. You could make the decision to increase your employer contribution and lower the employee contribution as well. And obviously that's supporting the day-to-day finances of an employee as well. And pensions is actually, the recognition of the pension as a sought after benefit and a highly valued benefit as well is increasing also. So my final takeaways on this page, sorry. So in terms of the expectation of employees, it's increasing. Agencies find themselves in a difficult period at the moment, and many agencies will probably be working with frozen budgets, for example, making it really difficult for HR leads to maybe introduce new benefits, for example. So my first point to everyone joining would be make sure that you work with an IFA, an intermediary, a broker, because at the very least, they should be making sure that you're getting the best value for money across the benefits that you provide. And they should also be able to give you that finer detail to bring more of your benefits to life, as well, to help with that communication strategy, whether it's on the tech side or whether it's on the life stage side. So make sure that you're working with an intermediary there. If you are struggling for budget, become a benefits facilitator as well. What benefits can you make more cost effective, even if the employee is paying for it? So if they were to go directly to an insurer or provider, can you offer better rates for that? It's more than likely that you actually can. So being able to facilitate that can go a long way as well. and also promote the use of salary sacrifice where you can. So there's still a lot of benefits in terms across pensions, EV schemes, other bits, perks that can be linked to salary sacrifice, which can actually, make an employee salary go a lot further than it's currently going at the moment as well. So review salary sacrifice benefits and see how that can be applied to your workforce.
Thanks, Charlie. That's great stuff. Tanya, I'm going to come to you now. There's been lots of changes. Obviously, Labour came back into power in 2024. There's been multiple legislative changes that have either been proposed or implemented since then. It would be really great if you could recap for us any of those key changes for 2025 that are already in force, including new employer duties, evolving expectations, and where we're seeing any risk emerge in practice.
Yes, thanks, Jess. So as you say, Labour came into power whenever 2024 was it?
Yeah.
And after 14 years of Conservative government, they were very keen to try and bring in some changes, and that is what they have done and in the process of doing. Angela Rayner was very much at the helm. She's slightly more in the wings at the moment, waiting to launch her leadership challenge, but it was really a lot of her initiative. And you will have seen headlines, no doubt, about the Employment Rights Bill that was and is now the Employment Rights Act, which came into being from December last year. Just because it's an act, though, it doesn't mean that everything has been enacted. That is going to be phased in during the course of this year and next. But as you say, Jess, there are already some legislative changes that have happened prior to that. And in terms of what comes next, I'd just remind everyone, if they're not aware, that last week the government actually put out a roadmap of what's coming next and when. So keep an eye on that, because there's still consultation going on. So things are still a bit fluid, but I'll kind of tell you what I know to the extent I know it as of today. But as of next week, who knows? So what's in play now? From October 24, there is a positive duty on employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. And by workplace, I don't just mean in the office. I mean after work events, the inevitable Christmas parties. Always get a call after a Christmas party from a client saying, oh my God, something happened in the pub. That's when problems can really arise. So as an employer, you need to be very aware of that. You need to be training people, letting them know what your expectations are, i.e. zero tolerance for any sort of harassment. And of course, in some work sectors, including media and agencies and others, there can be high pressure. It can be a fast moving pace, and there can be a degree of informality at work. And that's all well and good, as long as, you stay on the right side of the line. And harassment is basically creating a hostile working environment for somebody because you're giving them attention that's not welcome. So it's people understanding what those implications are. And the reason it's important is because if you don't get it right, obviously it's very bad in terms of reputation. You don't want your clients, your high visibility brands, to feel affronted that your culture is not in line with their expectations. So I'd say commercially it's really important. And of course, legally, you don't want to end up in a tribunal facing damages for discrimination and so on. Not a good look. The next thing, flexible working, which Graeme has touched on already, just to make the distinction, in case it's not already clear, between flexible working and hybrid working. So if somebody makes a flexible working request, that is a request to change their contract of employment, to change terms and conditions. So say they want to work, they're working 5 days a week and they want to work 4 days a week instead. That often happens with mothers returning from maternity leave, for example. They have to make a formal flexible working request. And since April 2024, that right is a day one right. So from the first date of employment, they can make that request, which I personally find slightly odd, that you've just recruited somebody and they've accepted the contract, and then on day one, they can make a request to change it. I don't really get that, but that's the law. So if somebody puts in a request of that nature, you've got to take it seriously and go through the usual route. Not time to go through what a request looks like, but you can find all the information online. And an employee has up to 2 requests per year that they can make. So just when you thought you finished with the first one, another one can come along. And don't underestimate flexible working requests and the impact. Last year, I had a case with a flexible working request that was refused, and it was listed for hearing in the tribunal because the employee was not happy about the decision. I was acting for the company, actually, and the case was listed for 13 days in the tribunal. So flexible working requests are a thing. You need to take them seriously. Hybrid working is not contractual, and we'll come on to that later. Redundancy protection. So this is really for women who are pregnant or on maternity leave or adoption leave or returning to work from leave. The protection that they have has been extended from 12 months after the birth of their child to 18 months after their child's birth. And what this was to try and address was that, and I do see it quite a lot in my practice, that women returning from mat leave, often after 12 months, they come back and within a week they're put at risk of redundancy. Not always, but that does happen. It's out of sight, out of mind. And in order to try and address that, they have got an enhanced protected status, including for 6 months after they get back. And what that means is if they are at risk of redundancy and if there are any suitable alternative vacancies, that they should get priority to take those vacancies rather than somebody who's not protected. Of course, there is a requirement to look for suitable alternative work for anyone at risk of redundancy, but they have a kind of special protection for that period. And if you don't do that, then and they're dismissed, it can be automatically unfair and there can be discrimination claims. Then we've got carers leave. That is just really an administrative issue, just to be aware that they're entitled to 1 week's unpaid leave from day one. And just mentioned also strike action. There's been a lot of stuff around industrial action. I don't know how many of our audience are unionised, but there's a lot of activity in that area in terms of enhancing trade union rights. So strike action, you can no longer insist on having a minimum service level in your business if strikes are enforced. And then the last one I've mentioned already, the Employment Rights Bill, which was passed at the end of last year.
Thanks, Tanya. So looking ahead now to 2026 and beyond, what do you see are the biggest employment law risks that UK employers are currently underestimating, and what should people be doing right now to prepare?
Okay, so as I just mentioned, industrial action is a biggie. It's very involved. I've got no time to get into the detail, but please check it out. From, in fact, next week, various enhancements will be applied to industrial action. So you can't dismiss somebody because they become involved in trade union activity. That could be automatically unfair, and various other things that flow from that. And it can be relevant to the media sector because it has seen, I think, a rise in union activity and strike action, especially in some newsrooms and agency functions. So those strengthened protections and reduced notice periods and things are something to watch out for. In terms of family-friendly stuff, from April this year, we are going to have day one paternity and unpaid parental leave rights. And also statutory sick pay will be applicable from day one, as opposed to the current regime. So just make sure you update your payroll, your policies and your manager guidance, so you don't score an own goal and you know exactly what's happening and when. And then the biggie, drum roll, unfair dismissal changing. And the current timeline is 1st of January next year, which feels like a long way away, but it's not. And just for those who may not be aware, what's going to happen is that when an employee joins you, instead of having to wait for 2 months, for 2 years before they get full employment protection, i.e. the right to not be unfairly dismissed, that dropped from 2 years to 6 months. It was going to be a day one right. So if for the employers out there, count yourself lucky that you've actually got 6 months to assess somebody as opposed to knowing on day one whether or not you want to keep them, and think about what your probationary period looks like. Because if you all say having a 6 month probationary period, there won't necessarily be enough time at the end of that period to deal with any subsequent dismissal if you're not happy with them. So I'd say maybe think about reducing your probation periods to 3 or 4 months if they're already at the higher end. So you've got time to finesse any issues you might have. It's not going to be easy. I think almost performance managing somebody as soon as they step through the door is not great for employment relations and work generally. And as we know, it can take people a bit of time to settle into their workplace. But it is what it is. And I think you need to be aware of it, obviously. Also bear in mind that the current cap for unfair dismissal damages for compensatory award, which is either capped at 1 year's salary or 118,000 if you're a higher earner, that cap is being removed. So the potential damages or the settlements that you're having to negotiate could be considerably higher because there's no longer that limit on what the damages could be in a tribunal. And anyone you employ really, I guess, from July this year, by the time if they're still employed, if they still get to January next year, they will have acquired 6 months service. And this is retrospective. So this is why I say it's important not just to think, oh, well, not worry about that till next year. It's effectively going to impact anyone you employ, I guess even from now, because the 2 years is already shrinking. It's down to whatever it is. And from 1st July, they'll have 6 months by January next year. So it's really just being absolutely on it in terms of probation periods, performance management, and keeping a check on what's going on. One other thing, at the moment, employees have 3 months from the date of any dismissal to bring an unfair dismissal claim. That is going to be extended to 6 months. So, and the ACAS conciliation period that they have to go through prior to bringing a claim has already been extended from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. So what that means in a nutshell is you could have, say somebody's left you, it could be 12 weeks of ACAS conciliation and 6 months worth of them having left. So in other words, you could be looking at 10, 11, 12 months before you know whether someone's going to bring a claim against you, which is really not ideal. But that's the way it is. And I've mentioned in the media context, there's rapid changes in shift patterns, teams moving between projects and things. So, you've just got to be aware of who's doing what and where and when. And also in terms of altering any hours or any roles, the other biggie is the fire and rehire ban, which basically means that if you want to vary anybody's core terms of their employment contract, and I'm talking pay, hours, location, their role, their duties, you will have to get their consent from next January to make those changes. If you don't get their consent, then if you try and make the changes, that would be deemed automatically unfair. And what the default position is at the moment is that you try and consult with somebody if you want to change something in their contract. And if they don't agree after consultation, you can serve notice to end their current contract and offer them a new contract on new terms. That will be out. There will be an exception if a company is in real financial dire difficulty. Under those circumstances, they might be able to, but ordinarily not. So obviously, if your contracts of employment need to be reviewed and changed, look at them now, because come next January, it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do that. So I think those are the key areas I wanted to cover. Jess, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much there for people to consider and make sure they get in place. If people are confused and they're not quite sure, do lean into your HR teams, lean into JourneyHR, lean into your law firms like Tanya at Collyer Bristow, and make sure that you're getting that right in advance. As we move on, I'd like to touch on flexible working, Tanya. So with flexible working now a default expectation rather than a perk for employers, do you think that the UK employment law is keeping pace with how work is actually being done, or is it still built for that pre-pandemic world? And how can businesses prepare for this whilst making sure that they've got peak performance across their teams?
Yes, I think in short, no, I don't think the law is keeping pace with it, Jess, and I'll just expand on that a little bit. What we've seen during the pandemic and post-pandemic is that hybrid and remote working have moved ahead of where the law is. The law really was designed for a world of fixed hours and fixed workplaces, not the fluid patterns that we now operate in. And in agency and media, obviously in production, creative, editorial, there's a gap, isn't there, between statutory rights and what people are actually doing in practice. So as you would expect, the law is process driven. It can be a little bit difficult to navigate in terms of its process and its procedure. So legally, employees have a right to request flexibility. They don't have a right to flexibility per se. But the problem is the blurring between hybrid working and flexible working. And if they've already been working in a certain pattern on a hybrid, non-contractual basis, they will then assume that that's sort of baked into their contract and that they can continue to operate in that way. And, you know, that is just the nature of working life. And I think most of us, and Graeme touched on it, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or variants of that, that's how a lot of companies have landed. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think over time, if that continues, it's certainly arguable that could become a contractual right, because that's custom and practice, right? And so it's going to be difficult if companies want to change that balance for them to do so. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is there can be inconsistency between teams within a business as to how they operate the hybrid policy. Some teams may be a bit more open-minded than others, and that can create some sort of feeling of unfairness from one team to the next. Well, they don't have to come in on this day and we have to, and all that, you know. So as employers and HR, you've got to try and navigate that, and it can create a bit of a tension. So if conflict arises, obviously communication is good. Try and deal with it. And if flexible working requests are made, as I said earlier, please deal with them in the right way. Don't get tripped up by the fact that you think everything's hybrid these days, because flexible working request is quite different. Yeah, if a request is declined, formal working flexible request, employees can see it as an inconsistent or even unfair. And that's when, as I mentioned, I had a case which was exactly on that point. So how do you manage it? And how do you, if you are going to be concerned about how often people are coming into the office, for example, what they're doing when they're working from home, there are surveillance tools out there. I'm not a fan, frankly. I think, you know, if you can't trust your workforce, it's not a good look to start, you know, micromanaging them when they're at their computers to see how many keystrokes they're doing on this and what time they log on and all that. If you've got genuine performance concerns, obviously you can zone in on that. But overall, culturally, I think it's better to try and lean into what does strong performance look like, set clear expectations, you know, all the good HR management tools that we've already got at our disposal, and use those rather than obsessing about location and remote, hybrid, etc.
Thanks, Tanya. That's really, really fascinating stuff. And Graeme touched on it earlier, but I'd like to talk to you a bit about AI as well, because it is becoming a hot topic. It's certainly one that all of our clients at JourneyHR talk about to us constantly, the use of AI. And I'm curious, as it becomes embedded into everything we do, into hiring, performance management, and even dismissals, where does the UK employment law currently place the responsibility, and where do you think it will need to evolve?
Okay, well, to answer the question in a quick sentence, the responsibility will always lie with the employer, human beings. You can't just use AI in your systems and blame the algorithms and say, oh, well, the bot told me this, the ChatGPT told me that. No, that's not going to work. And of course, we are using these tools, as you say, everyone's using them in their workplace. And that's fine, as long as they're used with a degree of caution and always with human oversight and judgment. So HR teams are using it across the whole employee life cycle, including from shortlisting candidates to screening candidates, scheduling interviews, analysing their performance, and even decisions around their probation capability and so on. And that's fine to use it as a tool, as long as it's not the last word on the topic. And the reason I say that is because AI builds intelligence based on information it already has. And if as an organisation, for example, you have recruited more women into a particular field or area in your business than men, when it comes to scanning the CVs, it might have a bias towards selecting female candidates rather than male candidates. It's not really doing anything wrong, it's just picking up on the data that you already have. So it's just being aware that there are sort of built-in biases that you need to address and make sure that human review is going to avoid. And the other thing I think which is really important is data protection, GDPR, putting anything into a public sort of AI server which is not secure, and that data can leak out. So you need to be really careful if you haven't got Copilot or something, which is a secure facility. Be really careful about the information you're putting into that AI tool, because that could be a breach of various things, including data protection, human rights, potentially. I've mentioned not the bias issue, so avoiding discriminatory effects of AI, as I've mentioned, and just have transparency and oversight about how you're using it. Not people not feeling constrained to say or pretend they're not using it when they are. It's fine, just use it, but use your head and use your heart at the same time.
Thank you so much. It feels like a biggie, that one, and one that's ever evolving. So it's quite a difficult one to keep pace with. There's been quite a lot you've taken us through there, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room are kind of thinking, gosh, there's so much for us to consider here. If you could kind of narrow it down into the top priorities that people need to be focusing on right now to make sure they're set up for future success, could you take us through what they'd be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess going back to the unfair dismissal stuff, which is, I think, probably one of the key things, structured probation periods, thinking about how long those periods need to be, clear job expectations, feedback and consistency, as I said. What cuts across everything I've been talking about, and we've been talking about, Jess, is the need for early clarity, because day one rights are going to, if they're not here already, are coming. There'll be tighter dismissal rules, so that you need to set expectations from day one, and you need to monitor progress and consistency and intervene early. The days of having informal and ad hoc approaches and the fireside chats, I don't think they're going to pass scrutiny. I think we need to be more robust. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that, but that is the direction of travel in the law. It's very employee protection focused. And I think as employers, we need to be aware of that and kind of respect it. Also, review and update contracts of employment before the law makes it almost impossible or a lot harder. So get your reviews out. You can't just unilaterally change contracts now anyway. You still have to go through a consultation process. But at the end of that, as I said, there is still the option to change if people are refusing. Come next January, I think that's going to be much more difficult. Taking reasonable steps to comply with anti-harassment law. This is not going away. It's, if anything, becoming even more prolific. I should also mention that apart from making sure that people in your own organisation aren't harassing each other, you've also got to look out for third-party harassment. So any clients, to client event, if you're taking clients out and someone's behaving inappropriately, you as an employer have to tackle and deal with that, which I can appreciate is pretty uncomfortable when you've got a good client relationship and they're paying you lots of money for the campaign or whatever, and they're getting a bit handsy with one of your staff. How do you deal with that? And you need to have mechanisms in place, call it out in the right way at the right time. So don't just think of it as being a very contained situation in the office. It's much wider than that. As I said, managing hybrid and flexible working expectations in a world where a lot of people think they have complete flexibility anyway, and being ethical and safe in your use of AI, as I just mentioned, in HR processes. And finally, I haven't really mentioned it before, but I think it is important and it overlays everything, is having a culture that's inclusive, that you're looking out for people's well-being, especially when they're working remotely, when it's harder to see. You can't see if somebody's stressed so well if they're working from home. As Graeme said, some people don't work well from home. Some, maybe the younger demographic, don't feel comfortable. They don't have interaction with their older colleagues. They're not properly managed or supervised. So just be aware of that. Don't make people feel they have to be working from home if they don't want to be. And also having equity strategies and equality strategies, trying to give a level playing field where you can, so that as the world changes and there are all these shifts, you're at least aware of the fact that you've got a diverse workforce and that you're supporting it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Lots of food for thought there across all three panelists here. What I'd like to do is open the forum now to our audience. Appreciate it's quite a big pool here. If anyone has a question for any of our panelists or indeed for myself, you can put it in the chat bar now, or if you want to shout out, you're more than welcome. I'll give it a couple of seconds. No, it's absolutely fine.
Sorry, no, I have one that I've just thought of. Okay, it's a quick one. I'm from Radio Works. We work with JourneyHR, and we've got the flexible working requests in place in our handbook, and we've explained what the process is and how the decision will be made. What we were told is that there are 8 business reasons for why it might be rejected. Have they been outlined by law, or is that kind of guesswork? How protected are we if we do decide that one of those reasons stops that person from having the request accepted, or how protected are we?
For me, yes. Yeah, flexible working requests, you're absolutely right. 8 prescribed reasons why an employer can refuse a flexible working request. For example, the difficulty of rearranging work. If somebody wants to work fewer days a week or fewer hours, there aren't enough other people in the business to accommodate their additional hours that they're not working. So something like that. And those 8 prescribed reasons haven't changed. They're still in play. And you have to base your decision on one or more of those reasons. You can't fall outside of what those reasons look like. And they're all good business rationale reasons. But what I would say is, and the change in the law or the shift in emphasis is, I don't think you can just say, well, we're picking this reason because it's one of the prescribed reasons. I think you're going to have to justify it and explain it and give context, and where possible, some evidence to support it. Maybe you have to show what your other workers are doing in the example I gave, what their working hours are. Say everybody's working on a very part-time basis. We just don't have enough bodies here to be able to mop up the hours that you say you don't want to work, and actually make it factual and relevant to your own workplace, rather than some sort of generic, well, this is the reason we're going to pick, and that's it, deal with it. I think it's going to have to be a deeper dive than that. And if it's not, I think it will be open to challenge and appeal.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just tricky, isn't it? Because a flexible working request can be so many different things. It can be reducing hours. It can be like basically going full-time, part-time, just working from home, but hours, everything else stays the same. And it's hard to fit all of that just into 8 reasons, particularly if you're a small business. But yeah, it's good to know that they've not changed.
No, they haven't changed. I think the hybrid one is an interesting one, because I do know companies that have flatly refused flexible working requests to work from home permanently, because the whole point of hybrid working is it's supposed to create a culture of people coming in and out of the office and having some degree of collegiate interaction. And if you allow too many people just to simply work from home, then you lose that dynamic. So that companies are generally resistant unless there's a very good reason to allow people to work from home on a permanent basis.
Thank you. I saw someone raise their hand then for a second, but it went away. Oh, Jasmina, here we go. I'm just going to read out your question. At what point does custom and practice on hybrid working become contractual, or does it not?
Good question. Yeah, so it's there isn't a timeline yet that says after so many weeks, months or years it becomes a contractual right. I mean, custom and practice is what it says on the tin. It's a bit like bonuses. If bonuses are applied every year in the same way, they can become custom and practice, even though they're technically discretionary. So I guess what I would say is the longer a hybrid working model goes on, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5 years, how realistic is it for a company to turn around then and say, actually, we're going to change it? Because people will have got used to that model, that working way of life. They will have adapted their childcare accordingly. They'll, change their lives to accommodate what the company's requirements are. And practically, it's not always that easy just to change it. So I think we saw quite a lot of changes post-pandemic, with companies trying to decide what was the right balance for their business. And from what I have seen of organisations, including my own, it's to Graeme's point, 3 days in, 2 days out seems to be where most companies have landed. That being said, there are others, and there are some in the media and certainly in newspaper rooms that require people to be in all the time because it's fast-moving environment. They need people there to do a story, to do this, to do that, and they expect people to be on the ground. It's not good enough to be on the end of a Teams call. So I'd say it's really industry specific. And if companies have set their stall of this is what we expect, then you have to either like it or lump it. But to the customer practice, over time, it will become embedded. I can't give you a specific timeline. It's going to be on a case by case.
Lovely. We've got another quick question coming here from Kitty. Will notice periods count towards a 6-month qualifying period?
Yes, notice periods will count. But of course, you don't have to let somebody work out their notice period if you don't want to. So what most employers do is, especially if they're coming up to that threshold of potentially flipping into the right to claim unfair dismissal, is they'll terminate the contract early and pay in lieu of notice. So
Yeah.
you can cut it off, and then the pylon will take care of the balance.
Great. Thank you so much. We've literally got 3 minutes left. What I'd like to do in these final 3 minutes is give the panelists one last chance. If you've got one takeaway from today's session for the audience, what would that be? Graeme, I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you. And I'm not sure I've got one. I've got a couple. I think just sort of recapping slightly on what I was saying. So I think that the biggest news that's coming out of our census is the loss of young talent, and I think it's something that really concerned me when I was looking through our data. So, and particularly, I'm a parent of young adults trying to make their way in the world, finding their first jobs, and so I know just how important those stats are going to be. So I'm really hoping that will change, and I urge everybody to invest in young talent, if anything. And also that thing, we talked a lot about hybrids, and I think it's really crucial that we remember when we talk about flexible working and hybrid working that it doesn't work for everybody. And so we need to be mindful of our teams and need to listen to our teams and see what works best for them. And we did all-in study last year, and actually we asked under 25s, we asked everybody what they were doing now, what they would prefer to do. And it was only the under 25s that actually said they would prefer to spend more time in the office than they were currently doing amongst all the other age groups. So clearly younger people do want to be in the office, and so we need to listen to them and accommodate that as well. And then the last point really, I think, is around representativity, particularly gender at the most senior levels. There has been more women working in advertising than men since around 2015, and today around 56% of all employees across advertising are women. So that's really positive, but we're still not quite seeing that reflected in the most senior roles, although that is changing. And as I mentioned before, 41% of those most senior positions are being held by women, and that is more than double the percentage that we saw in 2002. So when we started recording that, so it is in the right direction. And I do believe that while it's moving very, very slowly, it is going, we are going in the right direction. And more than 60%, as I said, of junior and apprentices are women, and 70% of under 25s employed in the last 12 months are women. So it's a good, steady movement forward, but there's still work to be done. So those I think are my takeaways.
Thanks, Graeme. That's great. Charlie, I'm going to come to you next for your key takeaways from today.
So essentially, is your benefits package working hard enough at the moment from a cost and communication perspective? What's the perceived value of your benefits program to staff? I wouldn't necessarily be afraid to maybe get some feedback, whether that's just individual chats of a few key people, or actually sending out a staff survey to get that feedback. So I know agencies can maybe be a little bit apprehensive about doing that internally. So even if it's using JourneyHR, for instance, as a third party, or Connor Broadley, for instance, to send that survey on your behalf to get that feedback, so you can understand how effective your benefits are being at the moment.
Thanks so much. And Tanya, back to you for your final thoughts.
Yes, well, it's kind of the same really, but prepare for what's coming next, what's already in and what's coming next. Contract reviews. I mean, you should do contract reviews anyway. It's good practice. Please do them now. This is the time. JourneyHR will happily walk you through, or I will, or any employment person worth their salt, but you really need to get your contracts in good shape, and now has never been a better time to do it. Also get your recruitment processes as good as they can be, because the importance of recruiting the right people into the role from day one is going to avoid the possibility of then having to dismiss them by the end of month 6, which is never pleasant or palatable for any organisation. At the end of the day, we're human beings. Yeah, we're not AI yet, we're not robots. So we want to try and treat people well. So get the right people in the first place, and hopefully some of the issues I've been talking about won't come back to haunt you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to our panellists for your incredibly valuable insights today, and also for all the attendees that came today. If you need any support or advice on the topics we've discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email's there on the screen, but I'll also be sharing this deck and the recording with everyone afterwards. We'd also love if you'd have a couple of minutes to complete some feedback, which is via that QR code there. So please scan it and share your thoughts. It'd be great to understand what future topics you'd find interesting in the future. But thank you so much. We'll sign off now. Take care.